Good morning. So, wow, the world is getting crazy, is it not? When you look around, all this stuff that's going on with the political upheavals right now is pretty intense. And the whole world's ablaze in different ways right now. And what I wanted to talk about today was the effects of Uranus going back again over the Pleiades. And the Pleiades, just so everybody knows, it's a very small cluster of stars in the Taurus sidereal constellation. It's very narrow. It actually, there's different opinions, but it's somewhere between like 4¼ degrees up to maybe 5¼ degrees in sidereal Taurus in the sky. And NASA has some really good stuff, like how to locate it. You can actually see here's Orion, Aldebaran, and Orion's Belt, and the Fixar Rigo and Betelgeuse. And way up here at the far right is the Pleiades. So it's a small group of 7 stars. And the ancient legends on this are varied. In fact, I've even found that indigenous cultures here and even the Mayans had referred to the Pleiades. And what's interesting about this is that they always seem to be a reference to time and calendars. And you can see on this diagram here, the Alcyon, which is kind of right on the edge, the outer edge of the Pleiades. And some people say it's in there, some people say it's not. So I don't want to get into all these technicalities, but the bottom line is Alcyon was often considered the central star which the universe rotated around. And of course, that's the ancient legend where Atlas was holding up the sky. And the Greek legend was more that Zeus, the ruler of Olympus, had cast his daughters into the stars to hide them from the hunter Orion. So you can kind of see a little bit where these legends come from, because there's the star, the Orion constellation. So Orion's Belt is what they call it. So there's a lot to this. And the interesting thing that I have found about studying this, and again, when I come back and I look at, okay, is there any real truth to when Uranus goes over these areas, does the world get crazy and get nuts? And of course, we certainly know about this assassination, lots of people up in arms about that. And it's always kind of crazy when people celebrate the murder of someone, isn't it? But not too good. Anyways, but again, look at the human race. If we go back through time, I mean, if anybody wants, go watch the movie, what was it, with Quasimodo, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, or watch the other movie with Charles Lawton, I think it's Mutiny on the Bounty, on the ship Bounty. And, that's just a couple examples. How about Braveheart, right? So the human race has always shown itself to be extremely violent. I mean, look at the wars. We could pockmark wars all the way past. And, you can go back to the Hatfield and the McCoys in the United States. I mean, look at that. And, again, in Braveheart, what did they do at the end? They draw and quartered him, and talk about gross. I mean, that's like taking people, tying them up and having 4 horses, pull them apart and putting their body parts in the 4 parts of the kingdom. So the human race is capable of some pretty debased stuff. And it's also capable of some very divine stuff. And again, it's up to us how we appeal to that, right? And there is free will, isn't there? So anyways, back to the Pleiades and why I brought this up today. Clearly, I did some deeper research today. And like I said, Uranus is retrograde. And what does that mean? It's going backwards from Earth's perspective. And it's going to enter into the edge of the Pleiades right in the latter part of October. So, and again, there's a little discrepancy as to exactly where that star cluster begins. But if anybody's familiar with astrology, there's something called an orb of influence. It's kind of like pulling up to a concert, right? If the band is playing, you can hear them when you get out of the car, right? And the closer you get, the more intense it gets. And physicists know that is the inverse square law. It just means energy, logarithmically increases as you get closer. Well, that's very similar to how astrology works in these aspects of orbs. So what we've got here is Uranus coming back over on the retrogradation to the star Alcyon. But all through November, it's going to be passing through the Pleiades. Okay, you might say, all right, so what, right? But I went back, and the United States entered the Second World War right during the second retrogradation of Uranus. In fact, we know Pearl Harbor was December 8th, 1941, right? And of course, Hitler was already well at it, and that was established, not just by Uranus, but obviously Uranus sure stirred the pot when it first entered in, I think it was late 1940. So you got to remember, Uranus is very slow. It goes forward, stops, retrograde, goes back, and then stations and comes back for one final pass, of which it's doing right now. It's on its second, you could say, hit over Alcyon and sweeping again over the Pleiades. So, and again, Uranus will go, I forget when it goes direct, but I could look that up, but we'll talk about that in the future. But here's what's important right now is it's retrograding. Now, let's take a look at what's happening. Why is it NATO trying to sanction Russia to make this war stop? And I've been hearing a lot of reports, and they're all over the internet, about how the pot is being stirred. There's things that could be done. And yet NATO, and I'm not just saying NATO's to blame here, but again, I always go back to, where is that book? The Tower of Babel. You follow the money, right? And that's only one book that talks about it. And why I bring that up is because there are forces at work here. And Uranus seems to correspond to when these things happen. I even went back to the Civil War. And even though Uranus was transiting the Pleiades before the Civil War, if you look at history, and again, I'm not a history major or anything, but I did poke around on Wikipedia in different places. And the Civil War has always kind of fascinated me at, how this country could have gotten to that point, but it did. And of course, the whole issues of slavery and taxation and all these other things were really boiling in the late 1850s, or I should say mid 1850s, late 1850 area, 58, 59. And of course, it was believed to break out. I believe the Civil War happened right at about 1859, is somewhere right around there, is what my notes say. And plain English, what does this all mean? It actually broke out in 1861. But I heard there was so many events that precipitated that. There was a lot of attempts to stop slavery and so on and so forth. And it got very heated. There were, fights, fist fights on the congressional floors, etc. So if we go back, and the same thing if you look at the Revolutionary War, and you look at other historical events that have happened throughout history, and again, Uranus didn't need to be discovered. And I could spend all day here talking about that, but there was always some intensely revolting situation, or people revolting very intensely over situations of suppression or injustices when Uranus sweeps over the Pleiades. And again, this is all about the seven sisters. And it's quite interesting that there's seven stars in the Pleiades group. And again, the legend was that Orion was chasing them, the hunter, right? And again, Zeus or Atlas, if you will, had moved them into the Pleiades. Now, that's a legend. We can't validate anything. And of course, we sit here in modern times looking at our iPhones and all the technology, and we say, are these legends, or is there any truth to them? So the only thing I can tell you is that we certainly seem to see correspondences to the world, and we're in it right now. And again, all this varied opinions and polarizations that we're seeing in the news on so many different issues, definitely the Charlie Kirk issue and other things, are stirring the pot right now. And this is a very, dangerous time. Let's hope we can get through this. Now, one of the things that encourages me a little bit here is I'm not seeing some of the outer planet transits, particularly between Saturn, Pluto, etc., that usually have shown up in more volatile times, but it's still there. And mind you, in just 2 short years, we've got Saturn and Pluto going to a square. And those invariably seem to stir up a lot of issues in the world. And again, look at, we've got NATO talking about digital currency in Europe and all these things that are brewing behind the scenes, probably much more than we hear on the news. And isn't this interesting how it corresponds to the astrology? So we're going to see what happens. And that was one of the focuses I wanted to bring up here today, because we can feel it. The energy is really cooking. And again, I'll be talking about that this Sunday. We have a very intense situation here with an eclipse and a new moon happening exactly on a Sun-Saturn opposition. Talk about stir the old soul cauldron. That'll definitely do it. So this is a powerful time. And again, man, I hope we don't get into any escalations of war. And there's certainly a lot of places going on right now where that could flare up. And again, there's things we're not even hearing about on the mind control news. You got to remember, only what's on the teleprompters and comes through the wires is what's being exposed. And there are so many things brewing, and let's hope that that doesn't happen. So anyways, there's a lot of fascinating stuff when you look at the mythological histories in these stars, these constellations, and astrology. And, a lot of people, and including myself, I always used to say, well, how could that have any correspondences? But it does. If you go back and you start looking at these configurations of the heavens, it truly, truly does. So, and we're in one right now. This is a big deal. This is not going to happen again for another 84 to 86 years. That's what they call the synodic, or you could say time that Uranus takes to go around the solar system. So very powerful time right now. And again, we're seeing this. A lot of people are up in arms about a lot of different things, but notice how much more extroverted it is. Notice how much more everyone's wearing on their sleeves their opinions, which they always do. I mean, you go back through history. I mean, I'm amazed when I look at some of the riots that went on with the union wars back in the 20s and the 30s and 40s. And, my grandmother used to tell me, my God, you wouldn't believe the stuff, people with lead pipes, beating on each other over opinions, and again, we've seen this repeatedly throughout history in political, situations, and also in, just societal situations. But Uranus always seems to exacerbate this. And this is where we are right now, which brings me to another interesting topic. I've had some, and I have to say, I really get blessed doing readings for people, because I get to see into some very deep situations with karma and family situations, as well as the world. And, I've had a lot of people who've been calling me lately in government positions or connected to government positions, where they're telling me how dangerous AI is. And there's been a number of clients I've had recently who've been involved in national security issues or et cetera. And of course, they can't tell me much, right? And I don't ever pry, they're all classified information. But what their interest is humanity going to be safe, in the future? Because when you think about AI, and right now it's all fun, right? Isn't it fun when we can get on, Google or ChatGPT and get an answer and boof, it's right there, right? Sometimes it's not perfect. But here's the danger, and this is some of the things I've been hearing about, is that the data is being put into these exceedingly advanced systems on everyone. A lot of people don't know this, but they actually can build psychological profiles on us as our eye movements and our expressions that are recorded through the iPhone or a droid, etc. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's, being watched or what have you, but they can build psychological profiles on just about anything they want. And it's pretty wild stuff when you think about it. And, this stuff is only necessary when they want to look at you and see who you are. And that can be positive in one sense, because in one sense, you know, when you got criminals and investigation and they want to find out terrorism, good thing. But let's roll the clock forward and talk a little bit about the future, right? Like I said, in 2028, we're going to have the first new Saturn-Pluto square. Now we talk about digital currency. Now we can talk about the financial structures of the world really being put into place. Then we get the Saturn-Pluto opposition, which is going to come up. I wrote this down here. I got to find it. Yeah, that's going to be in about 2036. Now we all go, oh, that's a long ways away. Well, this is interesting how the powers that be and the structures of society, whether they're just sitting there calculating, you know, how to control society. I think it just happens. I think it's the forces of good and evil. I really do. And these things always precipitate events that are really powerful. A good example is look at 9/11. 9/11 brought in the Patriot Act. It brought the whole Middle Eastern situation with Iraq and many, many other things. It changed the world, just like COVID changed the world. That was a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So these things are marker periods throughout history. And I've actually, you know, poked around, and it's hard to get into all this data right here, but it's kind of fascinating how much it corresponds in and around those times. And it's usually never very simple because you have a confluence of things that are happening. So one of the things I'm going to do today, I'm going to start putting my comments. Let me see if it'll work here. It appears to let me put comments here on the stage so I can kind of see people's comments a little easier. So that was one of the things I wanted to bring up. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, again, I always love to look at astrology and consciousness side by side, because I always feel, and again, I believe I'm right, the most powerful thing in the universe is your conscious reaction to what's going on around you. In my experience, there is no question the astrological cycles and influences are exceedingly powerful on all of us, whether you believe it or not. And, you know, I actually did something. I know this is a sensitive topic right now, but there's a book. I don't have it in here right now, but it's by Vidas Valens. Vidas Valens was a contemporary with Ptolemy, and many people in astrology may have heard of Ptolemy. Well, what's interesting is Ptolemy was believed to be an Egyptian, and he codified a lot of astrology. And many of your scholars in universities had translated Ptolemy and said, wow, this is amazing. And there's one text called The Amalgamist that is quite profound. Well, Vidas Valens, I got exposed to him in the late 80s. I think it was right around there, when Robert Hand, Robert Zoller, and Robert Schmidt were creating a project called Project Hindsight, which broke up soon. And pretty much Robert Schmidt, I think, ended up translating a lot of Vidas Valens. But that didn't turn out as complete, though he did a great job. I'll give him that. And I have that work. And that's also known as Hellenistic astrology. Well, later, a man named Riley, I think, I forget his first name, but I have the book in the other room. I meant to bring it in, but I forgot it. And why I bring that up is because, and I'll show it next time, he did a translation that I think was much more conclusive. And I've been studying this again. It's been 35 years, at least, since I've cracked into this stuff, for 30 years for sure. And I got back into it, and I actually looked at violent deaths, and I went and I looked at several different ones so far. I'm not complete on the research, but talk about wild, like JFK. Of course, he's certainly one. I don't have the data on MLK or Malcolm X or RFK, but I'm going to look into these. And what I did is, because this is such a hot topic right now, I looked at Charlie Kirk. It was so eerie. There's something called the part of death. And the astrology was spot on. And it's to do with the positions of the new and full moons before you're born. Like, all of us have we're either born in the waning phase of the moon or the waxing phase of the moon. So every individual is going to have a new moon or a full moon before their birth. Well, these are known as the lots, which is a term for a mathematical computation of the position of the sun and the moon. Well, what's fascinating about this thing is Charlie Kirk literally had transiting Saturn and the sun juxtaposition in what the Egyptians called the superior position to the part of death that day. So again, this is I don't want to stir up a topic that's already insane out there. It's just crazy what I'm hearing out there in the world about this. And I even saw the Koreans were chanting Charlie Kirk. So this is so fascinating, the impact he had on this world. It was tremendous. And the Egyptian astrology, because I always talk about how I'm a Vedic astrologer. I hate to say I'm on anything, but I do use Jyotisha, Vedic, and Nadi astrology a lot. That's my core systems. But like I said, I'm just crazy enough to study anything I get my hands on. And when I looked at the Egyptian astrologers, which are really, because you got Sumeria, Babylonian, Egyptian, Greek, Hellenistic, all of this goes back to the mists of time. And again, hats off to the scholars. David Pingree really started this back in the 1970s, and there were actually ones before him, quite a bit before him, where they were translating stuff out of Greek, out of Coptic, out of Aramaic, Hebrew, etc. And this stuff is profound. And like I said, I think the coffee was stronger, or the air was cleaner, or the food was better, because these were some smart people. And the mathematics is stunning. They didn't have slide rules, they didn't have calculators, and they didn't have computers. And they were doing stuff from tables that is very sophisticated even now. And I went through, again, I'm not completed. And you can also see if you're not going to have a violent death. Now, I'll get a ton of calls and requests. When am I going to die and how am I going to die? And of course, that is something we're all a little concerned about, a bit morbid, I might say. I'm not fascinated with death. I'm more fascinated with consciousness and what we do after death, right? And who are we and what did we do while we were alive, right? That's and I said, what do we contribute to society in a positive way, right? So, that's the things I'm more concerned about. But it is fascinating. And this is a text. Again, I just acquired this new translation, which was just done a couple of years ago. And quite fascinating how you can see in a different way through the Egyptian astrology. And why I say it's Egyptian astrology is because this was called Vitis Valens of Antioch. That Antioch is a city that's now located in Syria. I believe it was created about 500 BC. This was a long time ago. And this, again, was disputed in some ways as to where he got all his information. Because, again, it's hard to prove or disprove certain things in all these bibliographies and references of other astrologers. But what we find, and I find this even as late as the 11th century, the references to astrology in society, in kingdoms, and in high places of knowledge was profound, because a lot of these astrologers, they don't even know that they existed without these texts. And what Vitis Valens had done is spent a lot of time in Egypt. He traveled to Egypt from Antioch and was citing, there was a Nephestio, or I forget the right proper pronunciations of the names, but all these different references to Babylonian and Egyptian astrologers. And I have to say, this stuff is profound. And, to you tropical astrologers out there, I would tell you this, that there's a rich history and a very rich set of techniques in this whole genre. And, again, this is why I'm not going to throw tropical astrology over my shoulder or Vedic astrology, because they're both profound. What's interesting is how different and varied the techniques are. And, there's a lot of cross currents where scholars are finding, wow, the Indian astrologers had mixed with the Greeks. Some say it's the Brahmins matriculated over from India to Greek. So this goes back into the mists of time, which is interesting when we look at humanity in general. And, another text that I mention frequently is the text known as the Share Hagilgum. And, I every now and then I'll get a comment from people, oh, the tree of life is, just a ripoff out of the Kabbalah from ancient knowledge or whatever I hear. I want to put this up and talk for just a second about some stuff here that is really powerful. And I'm going to go again to a screen share. Let me see here if I can get this right here. But this is kind of an interesting topic. And there we go. Now we're sharing the old screen. Again, I go back to this diagram. And the reason I go to this diagram, we could pick this diagram apart pretty much infinitely. It's quite interesting. And this is a diagram that I've kind of built up over the years, probably the last 30 years, of trying to just come up with a simple way to talk about an exceedingly infinitely complex topic, and that is creation and divinity and who we are. And I mentioned in the last several podcasts that this big, thick dashed line is the beginning of the material worlds where spirit begins to coalesce into matter. And it's known as Yetzirah, which is a strange word that just means formation. And there's actually a great text I mentioned about that. It's called the Sefer Yetzirah. And the Sefer Yetzirah has been translated by many different people. The one that I like the best is the one by Ari Kaplan. It's got a few spelling mistakes. Who cares? I love his intelligence. He I think wrote close to 80 books and passed away in his early 40s or somewhere in his 40s. And why I bring this up is if anyone has acquired the Shari Hagilgam, which, by the way, means the gates of cycling or reincarnation, you'll find, if you notice here, there are a tree of life in every one of these worlds. Well, the upper worlds are the very divine worlds. This is where it's believed that souls are created, way up here. There's no astrology, no planets up here as we would know them. And then again, they say there's 49 dimensions, 49 subdimensions in each one of these. Now, no one can prove or disprove this, but there seems to be a lot of evidence to support it, in my opinion. So the material worlds start down here. Well, if you go down, the Yetziratic worlds is where souls are more advanced. And then the Asaya worlds is the astral worlds. This is the worlds where spirit. Now, if you get into the Shari Gilgam, not that I'm promoting that's the only book you can get references like that, but it's one of the most conclusives that I've found. If you read the Upanishads and the Vedas, they're profound. And so many other books, the Mahabharata, there's a lot of texts out there that talk about this Hermetic stuff. There's even stuff in Masonic lore that's pretty interesting stuff. And it parallels a lot of this. Well, here's where I'm going with all this. And when we talk about the world right now, where everyone is so politically polarized, right? They talk about, and I have talked about this a lot, which is the lower conscious mind, known as what they call, in this text, the Nefesh. And again, I'll show you this here. Where is this? This is the book right here, or I should say the diagram that this book refers to. Again, this line here is the division between what's so-called conscious mind down here, or our perception of reality in this time and space, and you could say the subconscious mind. Now, stick with me here, and you'll see if anyone grabs the Magus of Strovolos or the Shari Gilgam, you're going to read a lot about how the astral worlds is where humans go right after death. And what's interesting is they say there could be literally 49 dimensions, 49 subdimensions in that. And there's also the 10 Sephirotic vessels on the tree of life. Now, you can see each one of these circles here is called a Sephira, which means spiritual containment, where you could say consciousness or someone's perception of reality forms in each one of these. Now, when we keep this simple here, this lower dash line is what they call the division between the lower consciousness. And, we meet people all the time. Some people are really rooted in this reality. Other people are very conscious. They're very aware. They see things. They think before they speak, right? They think before they hate, right? So interesting stuff here. Well, what's fascinating is the lower conscious mind, or what I like to call the present personality, is called the nefesh in the Shari Hagilgam. So this is the problem when studying all this stuff, is you tend to find you got to learn all these terms. It's like Vedic astrology. But what I like about this is they said that the lower conscious mind keeps recycling from the worlds of Asaya, which is down here. So this reincarnational loop keeps happening from the demonic all the way down, all the way up to the higher levels of Asaya. And they say you have to purify each segment of the soul to join with the next segment of the soul. So again, this is complex stuff. And if you read the Shari Hagilgam, it talks about the lower conscious mind, nefesh, which is lower conscious mind, joins with the spirit. And then the spirit joins with the karmic sheath, which is really where astrology is. And we keep purifying and joining to each one of these through what? Conscious awareness and the dissipation of karmas attached to the soul root. And that's the operative word there, the soul root. They say we all come from different areas in the soul root trees way up here. So this is deep stuff because, you know, I've had some very, very emotional conversations with people where you hear how parents have done things to their children, from everything divine to some really sad stuff, some really hurtful stuff. And you go, well, why in the heck would that happen? You know, how could that happen? Well, when you start looking into this whole karmic pattern, which Vedic astrology really shows well, it's quite a journey here, because people start to find that forces are at work here on this world, or in this world, that are outside of rational analysis. And now, granted, we see people do things and people react and they get angry, or they do something violent or hurtful or whatever. And of course, we react to that. But oftentimes we see things happening to us in our lives that don't make any sense. Like, why would this person do this to me? You know, like I had one person, she was completely innocent as a 3.5-year-old girl, and her father just left, never called her, never had anything to do with her. And then he just passed away in his 90s and wrote her out of the will. She's never even talked to him but one time. So you wonder, why could this stuff happen, right? Now, to get much more harsh, you hear about these maniacs who kill their children in various different ways, and then they run off and kill themselves. What is going on here? I mean, when you analyze the world, it goes from very divine, super good people, and there's a lot more of them, thank God, than the bad ones. But we see all this diversity of human action, human reaction, and karma. And what's in the middle? Conscious self-awareness. And we see some individuals just plain don't have that. I know I talk to psychiatrists all the time, and they're going, hey, these people are possessed. It's the only thing we can come up with, because there's no rational answer to what's going on. And now enters astrology. You can see these yogas in the chart, whether you analyze it with Vedic astrology really zeroes in on the yogas of these kinds of things with the parents and past life stuff, so on and so forth. The Egyptian stuff I was talking about before kind of really focuses more on ebbs and flows and how you're going to get killed, or, you know, when will you become the king, or all this. So, and again, it was very kind of materialism, more, or focus more on that aspect, where the Vedic astrology really does give us a lot of deep look-sees into the depths of the soul. But anyway, you cut this, you know, and this is where the religion's got a real big problem with astrology, and I kind of agree with them on this opinion, and that is somewhere in the middle, there's us, there's consciousness, there's your rational, common sense, deductive reasoning. And we are emotional beings having a physical experience, or better yet, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience, is the best way to put it. And I don't think we realize how spiritual we are, but we're spiritual with free will. This is why AI ain't never going to be like you and I. It can't. It's not going to feel. It's not going to get hurt. It's not going to get angry. It's going to rationalize totally like a machine, because that's what it is. And the human race is creating the very thing in the future. And this is what I've been hearing from so many different people in government that could actually destroy the human race. It's like a Terminator movie. And not that I'm creating fear with this, but just awareness. We have to be exceedingly careful with the weaponry as well as the machinery we're building. And again, hats off to James Cameron for writing a script that long ago. This was 40 something years ago. Remember, the first Terminator movie was, and of course, before that we had Blade Runner, right? So this is not a new thing, written by Philip K. Dick. So this is not a new thing. Humanity is always seeking to build the Tower of Babel, right? Not Babel. And it's interesting how the Vedas talk about, don't worry, divinity sends down into creation forces and people that stop it from being destroyed. And this is an interesting topic. And, you know, we're all the players on the chessboard. And sooner or later, that chessboard gets wiped off and recreated. And we're just players in the game of life. But I think what we have to always keep aware of in this insanity of the world right now is why we're here. And that is to experience, rationalize, and grow. And that's the main thing. Again, I went up to Krishnamurti, I think it was about a week or two ago. And, you know, I always liked him. He had a way of making you question your reality, question your thoughts, question your beliefs, you know, and this is a time when we can see Uranus going back over. You know, the world does what the world's going to do, and governments and forces on the structures of this world get stirred up. And when events happen, all we need is one false flag event, and you will see things come loose, and quite quickly too. So anyways, that's the topic I wanted to get into today. And what do you do with this information? Not that I'm here to tell anybody how to live their life or what to do, right? But it brings up the issue of question your reactions and question your beliefs to things, because we all have that center point called consciousness, or conscience is another word, you know. And it's interesting, a lot of people, you know, are of various different religions, and religions tend to get segmented into their dogmatic little fragments. Not that there isn't some that are really good, but, you know, Sermon on the Mount says the exact same thing that many of the truths in the Vedas and other things in the rabbinical texts, they'll say the same thing. And that is, who are you? Consciousness. That's why I love the Magus of Strovolos, because he makes you question your reaction and also your literal conscious mind and how it reacts to things. It's such an important thing. You know, I mean, you look at the old Westerns, nothing's changed. Oh yeah. You know, boom, meet you in the street, right? So, I mean, human nature has a tendency to always go to violence, to reaction. It's ego. It's ego. It's totally, that's why I say this is the soul cauldron. And, you know, I can, you know, get off of here and have someone irritate me too. We're all human. But I think if we keep that perspective of how we react to things, it's much healthier. And again, it's very undignified to celebrate people's murders. I mean, look back at Braveheart, you know, and, you know, you look at the movie Hang 'em High with Clint Eastwood, you know, popcorn and candy for the kiddies, and let's hang them all, right? So, I mean, this is, you know, a trait that humanity has always had, and it's exhibiting again now. I think it's much more pronounced because of the social media. Now, I mean, you got to remember, in 1968, I remember Resurrection City, you know, MLK was killed. And I'll never forget, I was out by my grandfather. He was doing something with the Secret Service out there in Washington, D.C. And I couldn't believe the riots and the reaction of everyone. And, you know, I mean, I can see where people were very, very upset. And it's very interesting how the astrology, when I went back and looked at that, it was very close to a Saturn-Pluto opposition. And of course, we had all this rebellion in the 60s. Remember the hippies, all that stuff. And, you know, Jim Morrison and all these different things that had happened with the rebellious 60s. And it crescendoed at the Saturn-Pluto opposition. So these astrological energies are, again, we could sit here forever talking about them, but it's a very interesting marker point. And I think what's most important, and that I'm just trying to convey, is we got to step back and look at who we are inside. I always say people go crazy in congregations often, and they get better one by one. And it's the one by one that collectively makes up collective consciousness. And this gets into the ages. You know, I was talking about longevity with someone here today, and very interesting because longevity, you know, we hear these biblical stories where Methuselah had lived to be 969 years old, you know, Adam, 930 years old. And you go, well, okay, is this true? I actually got asked an interrogation on whether or not it was true. It leaned towards it was. And it's very hard to analyze something that long ago, but it certainly leaned towards there was more truth to it than not. And it's interesting because Methuselah was the son of Enoch. And Enoch in the tree of life was taken and turned into the archangel Metatron. So again, we go back to all these old lores and stories. Are they true? They might be. They just might be, in my opinion. And this is hard stuff to validate, you know, because we sit here and look at documents and rationalize in our head and we go, well, okay, is that possible? They actually said that when Methuselah died, that's exactly when the flood happened. And talk about where we're at now. We're building machines and genetics and AI. And this is the story of the flood of Noah, is that back then, many of the angels had come in and bred with the humans, and there were monstrosities created. There's a lot of lore to this if you read the book of Enoch and many other texts about this. And of course, what happened? God got ticked off and said, okay, let's destroy the world as it is and rebuild it. And this is what the Vedas say. They say every 4.3 billion years. Now, I don't know if that's exact, but you could say the universe is destroyed and recreated. Now, whether you're a Big Bang theory or a contraction theorist, it doesn't matter. What does seem to weigh here is scientists are saying, well, the Earth is about 4 billion years old. Maybe everything else is too. We don't know. But one thing's for sure, these ancient texts, I don't think are just written because somebody wanted to sound smart. And they seem to be coming from very divine sources like angels and divinity brought down into humanity. When I look at, like I've mentioned a lot, I do this thing called a guardian angel on pendants. And this is fun stuff. Let me just show you this here. And I've showed this several times, but this is, I have so many better pictures I could show, but I'll just show. What's important about this is you can see on the bottom here, there is 9 letters. Well, that's the 7 inner planets of your birth chart and their exact positions with the suffix of Aleph Lamed on it. And I give people an entire instruction of the numerology that connects the soul at the time you were born to your karmic soul root lineage. Now, is it conclusive? No, but it's kind of eerie, some of the things that we see. You can see all these letters here, and I cover them on, I've actually been putting them on rings now and on pendants around. And what's fascinating is the connections to things in the biblical texts. You got to remember, this stuff was all translated, again, out of Greek for the New Testament, and of course, the Aramaic and the Hebrew. And the Aramaic and the Hebrew is very interesting because the Old Testament is really interesting on creation, Genesis, all this stuff. And the correspondences to your birth chart using this is pretty eerie. Like you could be related to this king or to this tribe or to this city. And I've had so many that I've done. And, you know, we read this stuff and we go, well, okay, you know, is it true? Well, it isn't just, you know, something that would be happenstance. It's numerology connecting your soul root from the birth chart. You use the sidereal positions of the planets, which is really, I found kind of jaw-dropping, some of the stuff that I read. Oh, this person was a bricklayer. They were a textile maker, or they were this, or they were from the tribe of this, or they were from this king, or from this lineage. Pretty wild stuff. And again, it seems a little nonsensical at first when you read it, but fascinating, Fascinating. And you can't make this stuff up. And it actually said in the ancient lore that wherever the positions of the heavens were at in an event happen, an angel could be drawn forth out of that energy. So that kind of brings full circle back to the Pleiades. You know, all these different imprints of the heavenly bodies are always relatable to some angelic force. And it seems to be there's a lot of them, more than anyone can ever fathom. And, you know, Henry Cornelius Agrippa actually wrote a text called The Three Books of Occult Philosophy. There was actually 4. And that touches a little bit on this too, how angels are drawn forth from a particular area. And this gets into, again, I always mention the forefathers of this country. And you go back to many kingdoms, they talked about this. And again, I had mentioned, you know, and I've shown this many times, where the capital of this country was set at a certain time. And again, the mystical symbols of the United States, there's 13 of these arrows and 13 laurel leaves on here. And again, you start looking at the sacred geometry that's in this, can't make this stuff up. It's pretty wild. Benjamin Franklin, you know, again, was very much involved in the drafting and contributions to the Constitution of this country. And he was really into astrology. Again, Poor Richard's Almanac was the beginning of the Farmer's Almanac, which exists today. And a lot of people look at the Farmer's Almanac, they wouldn't think a thing about astrology, right? It just talks about the general prognostications of weather or the seasons and so on and so forth. But it's interesting how that's the etymology of that, or where it came from. So a lot of cool stuff here. So I'm going to take a look at some of the comments, and I apologize. A lot of people have left me comments, and when I get talking, it's so hard to focus on comments. But I love the comments, and I wish I had more ability and time to really analyze them and answer them. A lot of people, you know, are asking some good questions here. So I'm just looking through here to grab a couple of comments here that I can make sense out of here and actually answer. So yeah, a lot of people are making comments about the Farmer's Almanac and Christian things, which is great. So some people are, yeah, here's a good one here. Somebody's mentioning about the psychological sickness and psychopaths. I remember hearing that there was 5% of them on the planet back in last century. Now I think it's 50% demonic psychopaths in the realm. What has changed? Well, that's interesting because, you know, I want to share something because I meant to touch on this before. And this is a very good diagram. I've mentioned this. These are known as the yugas. And Sri Yukteswar Paramahansa Yogananda had talked a lot about that. Let me see if I can dig this one out here. I meant to do that earlier. I'm going to go into this folder here and see if I can't find it. Yeah, let me see if I can find it. Session diagrams. Here we go. So there is a very interesting, let me see if I can locate where that thing is. They're called the yugas. They're called the great ages. Yeah, here it is, I think. This might be it. Yeah, this is it. So, and again, this is a rudimentary diagram. And, you know, they say the flood, and even a lot of archaeologists, you know, they're guesstimating with, you know, time dating and so on and so forth. But they say the flood happened maybe about 4,000 years ago. So where would that be? Well, they don't really know. But somewhere I've heard anywhere from like 4,000 BC might have been where it was. Well, isn't that interesting? We have the destruction, and they said longevity changed at that point. Well, when you look at longevity, most of us are lucky if we hit 100. And if we are functional past our 70s and 80s, that's a wonderful thing. A lot of people are. A lot of people are very functional up into their late 90s and even into their hundreds. Like I had mentioned, you know, Ella's grandmother lived to 112. I'm like, wow, you know, and functionally, she just got off the tractor and said, I'm tired, went in and went to sleep. You know, my grandfather on my dad's side, he was only in his 70s. He was tired, went upstairs, went to sleep, never woke up. So all of us are going to live to where we're going to live. And there's interesting things in Vedic astrology and also in the Egyptian astrology that points to the probability of when you're going to run into rough waters and you might exit. But one thing's for sure, longevity has really, really reduced, hasn't it? I mean, if these biblical patriarchs are correct, or if the data is correct, then they did live to almost 1,000 years old. And I think even Moses lived to 120. So, and that's not very long compared to 969 years. But here's what's interesting is we are moving up. A lot of astrologers are espousing we're in Aquarius. I don't think we're there yet. And again, I'm not claiming I'm right. I think we're going to hit the Aquarian age somewhere close to when the Hebrew calendar runs out. That would be my guesstimate. And I would tend to say that as we advance forward, obviously medicine is getting more advanced, science is getting more advanced, and people are becoming much more well aware of health issues. And now that we got RFK in there, maybe we'll see a little more awareness on some of the poisons that are being put in food and vaccinations, et cetera, right? So as we march forward, I think longevity is going to increase. And they say once we hit the Silver Age, which is about 2,000 years from now, 1,900 years from now, they're saying longevity is going to greatly increase. Edgar Cayce had mentioned this, and many other psychics, the Buffalo Calf Woman's, on and on. They had all said they see humanity living longer and longer and longer. And if the world's okay, that's not a bad thing, right? So get out of the insanity we're in right now. So they claim that we'll get to the galactic center somewhere around 11,500 AD, if you will. And you could see this is, guesstimates. And this is all, you can read about this. Sri Yukteswar and Paramahansa Yogananda have mentioned a lot of these things. There's a lot of books out there that talk about the yugas. There's a lot of variances in the yugas. A lot of people throw at me, oh, we're in the Tetra Yuga. We're ending Kali Yuga. No one really 100% knows. But I put this diagram together because it seems to collectively kind of show, in my opinion, where we're at. And we go around a central sun just short of 26,000 years. Now, some people say, oh, it's 25,500. Others say, no, it's 25,700. Whatever it is, we don't know. We don't know exactly, but it's approximately just short of 26,000 years. You can cure a lot of souls going around. Now, when I go back to the Sharia Gilgam and other texts that talk about the soul, we all seem to be purifying and rectifying the soul through these incarnations. And they say, before we actually escape out of the astral worlds and the physical worlds of reincarnation, we need to purify and rectify what they call the consciousness, the spirit, and the karmic sheath, which in the Sharia Gilgam is known as the Nefesh, the Rosh, and the Neshama. So that's one system that is nice to use because it allows us to at least grasp this in some diagramical way. You see what I'm saying? Because this is really complex stuff. I mean, when you talk about soul, spirits, and physical worlds, right? We for the most part, are still taxing each other to death, right? So we're really looking at a way to talk about this stuff. And again, I get some criticism. Well, this is the tree of life. It's a Kabbalah. Well, it's very ancient knowledge for sure. And I've never seen any text as cohesive as the Sharia Gilgam that identifies this stuff. It was actually put out by 36.org, but it comes from a man who was known as the Ari. The Ari in Aramaic and Hebrew means the lion. He was known as also the Arizal. Rabbi Luria was his protege who wrote the Sharia Gilgam and did a lot of it from his notes and memories and teachings. The Ari was born blind, to my knowledge, and he could not see physically, but he could see souls. He would get in front of somebody and say, oh, I see your lineage, your past, and your karma. And he would tell them about it. And Rabbi Luria penned the Sharia Gilgam, which is a stunning text. There's nothing I've seen as cohesive in a system like that. And it talks about how we live these lives and the consciousness that we die with, the awareness we die with, will directly precipitate where we go in the lower worlds of Asaya, which is known as the astral planes. And again, astrologers are all worried about when's it going to get good, when's it going to get bad. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love doing readings for people and telling them, hey, you're in this phase, you're in that phase. And it's so accurate. It's creepy sometimes, I got to tell you. It's really amazing. I see health issues. I see even moving to different locations can really change your energies. Wearing gemstones, all these things help. But in the end, we're all going to exit this meat suit known as a body. And what do we get out of here with? I know I talk to everybody all the time. Am I going to get the money, right? Am I going to get this? Am I going to get that? Well, no, you're not, because in the end, none of us get the money. Of course, when someone dies, we're always worried about estates and so on and so forth, right? But the real thing we get the heck out of here with, and believe me, we don't take nothing with us except your consciousness. You don't take your body, you don't take your favorite items and materials. That's why, materialism's important while we're alive, and so is health and all that. But, we got to really question, because I get the question from a lot of people. God, my life's been so hard. When am I getting the hell out of here? And is it going to be, am I going to leave this place? Am I going to have to come back and suffer more, or have more health issues, have more relationship issues, or, suppression in whatever way they got it, and I have to say, the charts can indicate as this soul is advancing up. But I also have to say that keeping a focus on your consciousness and your reactions to this crazy world has so much more impact on that. And this is what a lot of the great teachings in the religions and in conscious self-awareness have pushed towards. So yeah, astrology is really important, but you also got to question you and your reaction too. And when you combine those, then you're navigating. That's like a driver in a car who's aware of their circumstances, but also has a destination, you see. So again, why do you get in the car? You want to go somewhere, right? Well, where are you going? Do we ever question where we're going in life? And that's what I love about readings, is it can help give someone some direction. I never like to tell anybody what to do, ever. Like, I'm not here to tell anybody what to do in a reading, but I love giving them a nudge in the right direction, or showing when timing is going to happen, where something opens up. And again, you let the universe bring to you what it's going to bring. It's really interesting stuff, how all that relates. So I'm going to just look at a few more comments, and then I got to roll because I got an appointment here at 11 in 2 minutes. So somebody says, I love Sarah Connor. Yeah, in the Terminator movie, pretty interesting, And again, I always thought Terminator 2 was astounding. Remember the liquefied, whatever it was, guy played, I forget his name, but yeah, it was so good. It was so good. There was a lot of truths in that movie. And again, I always love the ending scene with Arnold Schwarzenegger when his character said, there's one more chip. It's right here. And he said, I know now why you cry, and I could never do that. And then he lowers himself into the molten metal and, of course, goes up in smoke. And there's so much truth to that. And I think that's going to be so much more a factor of reality as time moves on. And again, I've been getting a lot of really smart, knowledgeable people who are in various places right now of industry and government who are very concerned about this AI, that it is not unleashed. And again, the Terminator movies are probably the best example of what could happen. Not that it could just go that way. It could also become a totalitarian system where everything is completely monitored, controlled, and suppressed, especially if the wrong people got a hold of that AI. I mean, do you think Mao would have cared? Do you think Stalin would have cared if they would have killed you through some machine, robotics, or whatever? No, not at all. I'm always astounded when I read about Stalin. Well, this is getting too expensive to kill the farmers with bullets, taking a lot of money, right? Let's just starve them out. Just cut everything off. And that's what they did. I mean, you look at, the millions of people who've been slaughtered on this planet and still are being slaughtered in many different ways. I always say each new war is new and unique ways to kill people, right? And when you look at the morbidity of that, it's crazy. And yet the human race has to protect itself. It's this never-ending ascension of good and evil. And maybe that's why the worlds get destroyed and recreated. But the souls keep coming back. And that's why I think that cycle of that 26,000 years might be the whole washing of souls in time, because there really is no time. When you think about time, every day we see sunrise, noon, sunset, midnight, right? Think about that. If you were to change the speed at which that happened, you would change probably not only our reference to time, which you certainly would, you would change probably genetics. And there's lore that the asteroid belt used to house a planet that was quite sacred. That was a Sumerian legend. And there was a war, broke up that planet. Now, some people dispute that. And the whole solar system rearranged. So we're in a matrix here, a matrix of the soul. And this planet is only one place at where we're experiencing that. And the lower conscious mind is really blocked from the full access to that. And again, we get pieces of that through psychics and intuitives and astrologers, so on and so forth. But it's really good to open your mind to these possibilities. And again, studying some of these texts is very enlightening. And I hope people will check it out. Pretty interesting stuff. It's deep stuff. But if you just take it in and let it wash over you, it's very, very enlightening and conscious raising, which is the biggest thing we're here to do, so very interesting stuff. So anyways, I'm just looking, yeah, people are talking about binaural beats. There's all kinds of ways to quiet the mind, right? Meditation, all these mantras, all these different things, which are very powerful. It's all how you use them. And it's all, again, the game of the mind. They say the entire universe was created by the mind of divinity and the angels that carry it out. Very interesting stuff. So it's a lot of great comments here. I really got to go because I'm 3 minutes late from my appointment. But I wish I had more ways to answer these comments, but it's just too hard when I get rattling away here. So yeah, people love the Farmer's Almanac. A lot of great responses here. And again, it's just hard for me to get into all this. But yeah, someone's saying, remember to keep our humanity. Yeah, it's only out of what this repeat rinse life cycle. That's true. Yeah, there you go. It says it right there. So, all right, my friends, we'll see you on Sunday, which is the eclipse. I'll be talking a lot about the eclipse on this Sunday and the energies that are in play with that Sun-Saturn opposition. And let's hope the world can stay from getting more crazy, right? We'll talk to you soon, and thanks for watching.